So, hello everyone. Thank you for watching on wherever you're streaming this, whether it's YouTube, whether it's online, or you're watching recording. Welcome to this session on interviews. This is for people applying to UK universities, primarily Oxford or Cambridge, which is what we'll be focusing on, although I'll try to cover a bit more about interviews in general as well as part of the application process. Just to kind of, as an introduction to myself, my name is Matt. You can't see a screenshot of me, sadly, but there's my face. I studied English at Cambridge University many years ago now. I do have some recollection of my interview. I'll try not to reminisce too much, but it's good to go through that experience firsthand. So I've been through that. Obviously, I've worked in international education for over a decade and worked with lots and lots of students, coaching them, preparing them, and making sure that everyone has all the skills they need. So at any point, please do ask questions. If you have something that you'd like to ask throughout the presentation, type them into the Q&A. We'll try to answer them at the end, and I'll try to keep the session down to about 30 minutes maximum. So at any stage, ask a question, and we'll leave a couple of minutes at the end. So again, just to give you an idea of that we know what we're talking about. Over the past 5 years, we've held well over 1,500 students, the majority of whom are applying to Oxbridge. Obviously, Oxbridge means Oxford and Cambridge, just in case to clarify. Our success rate is 43%, which is over double the national, well, the average, which is 18%. So we do know what we're talking about. We've had lots of students coaching through the system. For those of you who have seen other videos, we work with students on personal statements, on admissions tests, and the interview is probably the most important part. The interview is the final criteria. The grades, the personal statement, the admissions test, they're all vital that you pass and do well, but they're the hurdles. You've got to clear those. And once you get to the interview stage, that's where the decision is going to be made. So it is probably the most important part of the application process for Oxbridge. So again, we're going to focus on Oxbridge and I'll talk a little bit about the interviews in general. Bear in mind, of course, that other UK universities like UCL and Imperial often invite you to interview. I was invited to interview at Warwick and Bristol, so some courses may require it. Any applicant to medicine and medicine-related subjects like dentistry will also be required to go through an interview. So it is a fundamental part of any top degree, anywhere you're applying in the UK, but particularly Oxford and Cambridge. And this session will focus on that Oxbridge content, actually. So just as a bit of background, normally you've done your personal statement, you've submitted it in October, you've done the admissions test, you've achieved good grades. You're normally invited to interview mid-November. Around then, letters go out. And at the beginning of December, the first 2 weeks is typically when most of the interviews take place. Now, what you're thinking is, well, if I only have 2 weeks to prepare, how the heck am I going to do it? Well, as I'll keep coming back to, don't assume that you can do 2 weeks of cramming. Make sure that you're starting to prepare now. The more work you do in advance, even if you don't get invited, it's going to be invaluable. So don't leave it until you're invited to prepare. Now, there are lots of horror stories out there about Oxford and Cambridge. If you Google Oxbridge interview cliches, there's plenty of them. There's the ones where the tutor will chuck a rugby ball at you. If you catch it, you're in because you're in the rugby team. And if you throw it back, you get a scholarship. None of that is true. And we'll talk about what they're trying to see from you. There's lots of funny stories, and I won't go into them because they're completely irrelevant. Don't be scared. So what we're trying to do is dispel some of those myths and tell you what they're actually looking for. And then as a point of admin, there is actually a difference here between Oxford and Cambridge. And this kind of affects which one of the two you would choose as part of your application. So as you'll see on the screen, Oxford would invite about 40 to 50% of total applicants to interview, and about 37% of those would get in. So what that means is, they sort of select much more carefully on the grades and everything like that. Cambridge, however, invite about 70% chance, with only 25% of those getting in. Now, the way to look at that is actually, if you're good at interviews, or if you think you can be good at interviews, if you're sort of confident and you portray yourself well, Cambridge is probably the better option. If you're just great on paper, and you want to get to that interview and you're confident, go for Oxford. So there's again, we'll talk to this in a bit more detail if you have book a session with us, but there are different things and each of the universities are very different. So these are important things to consider. So those are the basics. That's what it is. What we're going to look at in more detail is what's the formats, what are the different types of questions, what are some little techniques. I can't possibly cover everything in 30 minutes. I'll try to just give you a little taster of what might be the sort of thing we would look at in individual sessions with you as one-to-ones. And there's just a few top tips about what you might want to do to prepare. So what's the format of an Oxbridge interview? Now, again, slightly different between the Cambridge and Oxford here. Cambridge, you'd normally interview at one college, and then if you're not successful, you might get pooled, which means you get thrown into a big sort of mass of candidates, and another college might pick you out of it. Oxford, you can actually interview at more than one college first up. So again, that's something to consider in your application process. But normally, it's 2 30-minute subject-specific interviews. Now, as I'll keep coming up to, it's probably very nice that you're the football captain or that you're head girl. It's not relevant. They probably won't be asking you about that. What they want to do is assess your academic potential. They don't want to see that you know everything. I'm going to keep saying this, and I won't apologize for repeating it. They don't want to see that you know everything ever written. I studied English literature. They would not expect me to have read every single book from Chaucer, or even earlier, right the way through to the most modern literature known to man and woman. So what they want to see is what potential do you have within the tutorial system. I won't talk about the tutorial system here because I don't have time, but essentially they're trying to test the ability you have to thrive in small group academic sessions where you're discussing wonderful, imaginative ideas with your tutors who are world famous experts. And they want to see, are you the sort of person who's going to thrive in that atmosphere? So the way they assess that is for generally 4 kind of topic areas. They aren't specific, there are going to be much more options, but typically they would ask you a lot about your personal statement, or if you've done an EPQ, or as part of the IB, your extended essay. What they'll probably do in any subject is give you an unseen source material. So again, for English literature, I got given an extract. For engineering, you might be given a graph. For medicine, they might give you an article or a diagram. For architecture, there'll be something you won't have seen before. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might tackle those issues. There'll be some general questions, challenging ideas, seeing how you put ideas together, seeing how you think. And they'll probably give you some problem-solving questions where there might not be a right answer. I'll keep coming back to this as well. The answer might not be obvious. And sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know, but that but is vital. You've got to make sure that, okay, I don't know, I've never read this before, but from my reading, from my extensive passion for my subject, I know that I can put together some different ideas and arrive at a conclusion that makes me sound pretty clever. So that's the format. Now, the other big thing to note is that for all the years we've been doing these presentations and helping students, the majority of interviews, well, at least for UK students, international students often are online anyway, they are now all online. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that changes the format, but it does kind of level the playing field slightly so that international students and UK students are the same. So when I interviewed, again, many years ago, I stayed overnight in college for a night or two, and I sort of had a bit more relaxed, and it's a bit, you could sit on the sofa with a tutor. Now it's a very different format, and it does impact things like body language and how you might approach certain things. So again, you'll read lots of things on the internet. Unless it's been updated for online, it might not be entirely relevant. So here's some of the examples of the type of questions that were listed on the previous slide. So again, if you've mentioned something in your personal statement or your EPQ, they are going to ask you. If you said something in your personal statement, make sure you know every single thing about it. Do not list books in your personal statement that you do not know about. It can be strategic. So for example, I chose a very small specific area of literature that I knew I could revise and know everything about. But a better candidate than me would actually be much more widely read, and you'd have 3 areas of depth, as I mentioned in the personal statement webinar a couple of weeks ago. And if you've mentioned it, they're going to ask you. So what they're going to do is challenge what you've said. They're not saying you're wrong or you're an idiot. What they're trying to say is basically test out how robust is your thinking. Can your argument stand up? So in advance of that, if you said something in the personal statement, you've interpreted a text or an article in a certain way, read it, and then try to anticipate counter arguments. And also, what extra material is there out there that could support whatever argument you made in your EPQ essay or your personal statement. So know it inside out and be prepared for the counter arguments, both to kind of prepare yourself for what might be said, and also what other stuff could you use and bring into the conversation from outside of your personal statement that you might have listed. There are wider context questions. Again, this is tangential. That's a very hard word to say. But what they're trying to do is again, see, they know you might not have read it or mentioned your personal statement. Because you've mentioned it, though, they will go off on a slight tangent and test your thinking. So again, they're not expecting you to know everything, but they expect you to have a good grasp of the wider context. And even if you haven't read a certain text, they need you to sort of show that you understand how it might work, or a different type of medical theory, or a scientific theorem. Even if you don't know it in detail, if it's linked to your personal statement at EPQ, they want your brain to be able to jump and show how it jumps, and we'll talk a bit about that, about how you can sort of be intellectually nimble enough to take your personal statement and EPQ content and run with it, basically, and extend it. It's never list, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I have read this. They're not interested. They want to know about the depth of the content and the wider context that sits with it. So be prepared for personal statement and EPQ questions in general. Again, one of the third type of question I mentioned on one of the slides earlier was general questions. And this is sort of testing wider intellectual thinking, basically. And again, they don't expect you to know the answer. There might not be an answer. But what you shouldn't do is just provide a question. It's never a yes, no, provide an answer, sorry. It's never a yes, no. And they're more interested about how you arrive at an answer. They want you to see you sort of working out different interpretations. You might dismiss some. You might say, oh, I quite like that. Okay, let's run with this. But they want you to show a wide range of different interpretations, and it's the complexity of understanding. Again, it's not knowledge. It's not about what you've read or know. It's the understanding, your ability to interpret, to extrapolate ideas, to jump between ideas, but then also show how you've done it. If you ever provide an answer, maybe they do give you a graph and say, what is this? Well, they don't want to know it's the thermal dynamic, something or other. They want to know, okay, my thinking is I recognize this status. It looks very similar to something else I've seen. Therefore, my conclusion is it's very likely to be this. They're much more interested in that intellectual journey at arriving at the answer than providing the right answer. So once you've sort of looked at all those interpretations, then feel confident to say, I'm pretty sure it's this, and back yourself. And these sort of general questions, these wider ranging questions that aren't necessarily linked to a personal statement, text, or a theory, this is kind of the best opportunity to show off your knowledge and the way you think. And again, stay focused. So I know I said just go off on tangents. You can, but as long as they are relatable. So don't go there linking it to something completely different to what they asked you. Make sure it's always focused on that question. And even if you do sort of digress slightly, link it back within 30 seconds or a minute. Never get distracted and start waffling on. So very important. So general questions, they're much more difficult to prepare for than your personal statement and your EPQs, but there are methodologies of doing this. There are ways to interpret and prepare for these sort of questions, and ways to stretch your mind, warm up your mind. If you're going off and run a marathon, you need a bit of a warm up beforehand to make sure that you are nimble and athletic and you're thinking about things in the right way. It's a weird analogy, but hopefully you understood what I meant there. So that's kind of the format. So there are certain things you can expect. And again, just to build on that, again, something I'm sure I'll come back to is they're not trying to catch you out. They don't want you to fail. They want you to succeed. I think for those of you who like classics, there's a famous classicist called Mary Beard, who's often on UK TV. She, I think, famously said as an interviewer for, I think it's Oxford, could be Cambridge. She says, I'm not trying to get the student to talk themselves out of a position. I'm trying to get them to talk themselves into a role at the university. So they want you to succeed. They're not trying to trip you up. They're not trying to fool you. If they're asking you a weird question, it's probably just to relax you, just to make you think about things in a different way. And you might be a bit stressed. So the reason they do that is to make sure that you're comfortable. So that's it. So again, those Oxbridge myths, they're not nasty dragons. They're not trying to attack you. They are trying to help you arrive at your academic potential. So then the technique, as I've said a couple of times, it tests how you think as well as what you know. I would say the how you think is even more important. You have to have that basic understanding. You have to have demonstrated the passion in your personal statement. You have to have passed the admissions test. But it's the how you think, it's how your brain works. And is it going to be translatable to that one-to-one, two-to-one Cambridge tutorial system, supervision system, Oxford tutorial system? Again, verbalize your thoughts, talk your way through your thinking, have clear logical steps. Don't jump around. If you do make a progression of thoughts from one idea to another, make sure there's a link, show how you get there. And again, as I've said, listen to hints. They are helping you. They're not trying to sort of, catch you out. If they present a counter argument, again, we talked about that earlier in the EPQ personal statement section, there's a reason they're doing that, because they know something. They're trying to give you a hint that maybe actually you should consider this. And they go, okay. So never sort of go up and say, no, that's nonsense. Obviously, I'm sure you wouldn't, but they are trying to provide you with a guide as to how you might think. And it's up to you to take that path and to show how you're progressing along it. And as I've said a couple of times, it's testing whether it's right for you. Cambridge and Oxford isn't the be all and end all. I know I shouldn't say that because we're trying to promote programs that get you in, but it might not be right for you. So if you don't get in, don't panic. It's just ultimately saying that, they're not dismissing your intellectual ability. What they're saying is it might not be the right system for you, that collegiate tutorial environment. It is different. And, people have huge success wherever they go. And again, just building on that a little bit, don't feel demoralized. If you go in and you get the first question wrong, don't sort of let stand there and let it, shake your head and go, oh, no, I'm done, I'm out. Relax. And I know it's very easy to say that. This is going to link onto something I'll say later as well, in that practice, practice, practice. So that way, if you do get something wrong, you've probably got something wrong before, and you know how you might react in these situations. Don't be too dogmatic. So what that means is don't fall into a trap of saying, I know I'm right. This is right. How dare you question me? You can have strong opinions, but you have to say, I think this is right. I understand and I acknowledge that there is this counter argument, that there are alternative ways of thinking, but I maintain that I think this is the best interpretation. So it's okay to challenge. It's okay to think you're right, but don't be too dogmatic or challenging. Don't make unsubstantiated claims. So don't present a theory that you actually have no idea what it means, or you don't have any evidence or a text or an article or a journal that provides backup that it's true. Again, these guys are going to be world experts in your subject. That should not intimidate you, but it should make you realize that I can't get away with making up nonsense, or whatever word you wish to use there. And again, that whole keep relevant, keep focused. This is a skill that you have in job interviews. So again, if you're not invited, but you still do the prep, this is going to be invaluable stuff later on. When I have a job interview, sometimes I go off and waffle on a completely different area. Got to stay focused to the question. When I'm interviewing someone for a job or an academic program, I only want the answer to what I've asked. Again, it's okay to talk around it, but I'll need you to arrive at the answer that I want that's relevant to that question that I've asked. And again, that's what admissions tutors are doing. So that's kind of the format. It's kind of what to expect. It's how you might have a technique. Don't forget about body language. Now, this is much less relevant now it's online. Completely appreciate that. There are stories about, if you go and sit with a tutor in their study, but there's two of them normally, don't choose the comfy sofa because you'll sink into it and you won't be able to get out of it and you'll be from a position lower than them. That's not so relevant in the days of online interviews. Having said that, it's not guaranteed to stay online. Again, we'll look at that later on. But there's still a way to present yourself online. It's more tonal intonation. You can sort of modulate how you speak, make sure it's engaging, try not to be too monotone. You can use your hands, you can gesticulate. Don't forget that these guys are going to be interviewing hundreds for each college. They do something that makes them remember you, come across as engaged and friendly. Good to have your strong opinions, and make sure you're looking at them. Don't just funny enough, in Zooms, you often see people looking at one area of the screen and it's normally their own camera because they're checking out how their hair looks. Don't do that. And again, whether it's in person or online, make sure you have that eye contact. There's probably two tutors, so make sure you're engaging mainly with the person who's asked the question, but also everyone in that Zoom room or whatever platform they're using. And again, this is for a teenager not to be patronizing. I turned bright red making public speaking for a long time. It took me a long time to practice and be comfortable in these situations. You have to practice. This is not something that comes naturally to 99% of people. Yes, you get those wonderful people who can walk into a room and own it at any age, but make sure there are ways that you can fake it even if you don't feel confident. Make sure you practice. These are things we can work on in the one-to-one online sessions. These are things we can offer feedback from, as well as your intellectual knowledge. These are the things around the edges that may just make a slight difference as to how they recognize you. Everyone's going to be well read. Everyone's going to have opinions. So again, if you don't have the basic skills of interaction, you're not going to stand out against the others who are sort of in the same sort of situation. So body language is really important. I know it might seem ridiculous. I know it might seem patronizing, but it's a really easily forgotten thing, particularly in academic conversations, because everyone thinks, oh, this is only about what I know. It's not just about that. Again, it's oracy, it's interaction, it's about how you present yourself. And it's really important whether it's online or in person. So, okay, you've got there, you've done all that stuff. So how do you actually prepare for this? I've touched on a lot of this, but there are some key points. Again, for the EPQ, PS throughout this stands for personal statement. Hopefully you figured out by now. Make sure you do read around what you've said. Know your personal statement inside and out. You turn up. So again, not a great anecdote. You shouldn't do this, but I chose First World War poets as my specialist area, or one of my specialist areas in the personal statement. That's because I knew there's about 5 of them. I could read them and do all the reading around it and sound very knowledgeable if anyone asked about it in my interview. Again, I don't expect you to do the same thing, but that's the sort of preparation you've got to have. Remember those counter arguments, remember the context. So make sure that the questions the items you've mentioned in your personal statement, make sure they are prepared to the nth degree. Revise your notes from A level. They're probably not going to ask you what you're learning in your classroom, but it might come up if you say there's a particular area that you've really caught your attention. Make sure you're up to date with current events. If there are theories in whatever discipline you're studying for, whether it's medicine or politics in particular, obviously, or economics, make sure you're aware of the current events. Actually, again, another sort of personal one. When I applied for my second stage of my degree, which is the management studies, Judge Business School, I was asked about the mortgage crisis, which was going on at the time. And I did not know a thing about it. I stood there like a goldfish. Luckily, I managed to cover, but I realized that I was not up to date with current events. So even if you're passionate about your subject, it should come naturally, but make sure you're up to date with all the current events in that area, even just roughly, so you can link it to what you know really well. Again, the wider reading, we've spoken about how you prepare for that. Again, it's reading around your topic, having that breadth of knowledge across your discipline, and again, the personal statement EPQ. If you're applying to humanities, it's quite useful to get a critical thinking textbook. And that's the sort of thing we would work through in our one-to-one sessions. It's the applications of critical thinking. Medicine, engineering, yes, there's certainly elements of critical thinking and interpretation, but there is a lot more about sort of the actual knowledge of the subject. Humanities, it requires that little bit more critical thinking approach. And so there's an interpretation of a text can be done in 2,000 infinite number of ways. So you have to be prepared to have those key terms and definitions. Now, in your preparation, and again, we do this in our online sessions, it's good to categorize questions and create models, not model answers, but kind of areas in which you know. So we looked at the 4 different types of questions, but you can sort of subcategorize those into different types of approaches, whether it's theoretical or practical, etc. So there are answer models. There is no scientific way to prepare for interviews. It is, again, fundamentally down to practice. You'll notice down there, my final instruction is practice, practice, practice. But there are ways of scientifically structuring something so that you have extra confidence in tackling that. Do as many mock interviews as possible. Yes, I'm going to say that because that's what we do, but you must have mock interviews. I didn't have a single one back in the day, and I panicked. The more confident you are going in, the more different environments, the more people, different tutors who are grilling you, the more you'll be able to get, again, that wider thinking, that idea of rejection. If you get something wrong, it's good to get something wrong in practice first. So those are the kind of the key tips. And it just comes down to make sure you're practicing, whether it's with your school teacher, whether it's with specialists, just make sure you get as much in as possible to maximize your chances. So a few things to remember at the end. It is an opportunity to show off. Again, I keep saying, don't be intimidated. Don't sort of think, what am I doing? I'm out of my depth. There's all these clever people here. You're just as clever as them. So use it as an opportunity to show off, not being arrogant, but a chance to show that you are passionate and you would really, really thrive in that one-to-one Oxbridge environment. As I've said a couple of times, verbalize your thoughts, listen to hints, answer the question, and don't give up. Don't just fizzle out. Make sure that you actually sort of take every thought through to a conclusion, even if it's possibly a wrong one. At least you've arrived at that conclusion and you've verbalized how your brain has worked getting there. Make sure you do lots of revision, make sure you read around your subjects, do that categorization of the different types. I'm not going to go into how you do that now, because again, we've only got 30 minutes, but make sure that you can do that with our tutors online. And again, remember that body language and how you use your voice. You've noticed possibly how I'm going up and down, and I'm trying to vary the way I'm presenting it so it's not monotone. That actually shows enthusiasm, and that will come through much better. Once again, guess what the final tip is? Practice, 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 or just practice, practice. Do as many mock interviews as possible. Now, one final slide on going through to the online move. Obviously, this is COVID enforced, but there were international students being interviewed online anyway. It is likely to stay. Oxford have confirmed, I believe, that at least for 5 years, they will be interviewing every student online, which again does sort of favor international students a lot more because it's much easier in person. Cambridge haven't confirmed how long they'll be keeping it, but definitely for 2024 entry and likely 2025, they will be interviewing all international and UK students, apart from one college called Trinity College, which is quite a funny college because it's very rich and powerful and it likes to do things differently. That's where King Charles went. That's the type of caliber. Again, don't feel intimidated by that. I'm not trying to put you off. It's a great college, very good for science in particular. But again, they've done things slightly differently. They are interviewing in-person UK students. And again, I'm going to sound incredibly patronizing here because you all had several years of learning online with COVID, so you should know this stuff, but I'm going to go through it anyway. The basics: find a quiet spot. Your school can help you with this. Don't feel like, if you've got a home life that might not give you the quiet that you need, whether it's you've got younger brothers and sisters, ask your school, can I use the library? Can I reserve a room for this hour period? They will say yes. They want you to get in, and make sure that you've got a good visual behind you and it's not some weird background with your unwashed laundry. Get some nice books up there. Make sure that you can arrange these things. It shows the books you talk about in your personal statement. It's quite a nice conversation piece, if nothing else. Test your technology. Don't panic if it doesn't work, but log on a couple of days beforehand. Make sure you've got the links. Make sure your camera works. Make sure everything else, and have a backup device ready. Even if you've only got one laptop, your school will have a spare somewhere that you can use. If you don't have a laptop at all, don't worry. Again, your school will help you out, but have a backup and take notes. Sounds weird, and maybe you like typing. I know students these days like typing everything, but have a pen there, and you might not be able to record it, but you can make notes as you go and just remind you later. Okay, I forgot to mention this, but don't forget at the end, check out this and ask a question. So do take notes as you're going. Really important, and you can look back at it afterwards and think, okay, well, if I fail, I know what I did. If I succeed, I know the kind of thing that made me successful. And again, don't record it because that would be cheating, because you could potentially show future applicants, which you're not allowed to do. But do be aware that tutors will probably be taking screenshots and notes. So don't be put off. One of them will probably be directing the questions. The other one will be taking screenshots. And that's not because they're trying to get a weird photo of you. It's so that they remember who you are. And again, that's where a good backdrop or something that makes you stand out helps, because they go interview 150 kids and they want to know who you are when they take their notes, and they can look back in a week's time when they make their decisions. So those are the big impacts. Most of it still applies. The approach, the content, the format, it's all the same, even the body language and the vocal presentation. But you just have to be aware that it is a slightly different environment this time, and it's probably here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. So this is the slide that we end every presentation with. You don't have to be a genius. I definitely not, and I never was, but you do have to be well prepared. There are lots of clever people out there. They're all applying. They're all facing the same hurdles. These are scary interviews, but you shouldn't be scared. If you're prepared, if you know your stuff, if you're wider read, if you book some sessions, it's not compulsory. You can prepare by yourself, but if you need that extra help, that's what we're here for. And if you are that well prepared, you can go in with confidence. And again, if you get rejected, don't feel insulted. It's probably just that, it's not that you're not clever enough. It's probably just that you're maybe not the best fit for that particular type of learning. And that's not an insult at all. If you're well prepared and you enjoy those small conversations, though, there's a strong likelihood you'll succeed. And it doesn't matter if you're a genius or not. So do be prepared. And remember those 3 words: practice, practice, practice. Vital. So here's the final slide. If you'd like to know more information, there's a QR code there that I'll leave on the screen for a few seconds. You'll find the contact details, and we'll reach out, of course, to be in touch. But if you'd like to get hold of us and ask anything more about interviews, about personal statements, about admissions tests, about the application process in general, we'll be delighted to help. So please do get in touch. We know how much support and how much work this takes, so let us know. Thank you very much for watching, whether you're watching this live or watching this at a later stage. We really hope we can support you online, and best of luck with your journeys, whether it's into Oxbridge, whether it's a different area, whether it's UK or anywhere else in the world. Best of luck, and do please ask for that support if you need it. Always here to help.